Well, it's been a while, so I thought we'd start off by discussing food. Sort of coming up to Christmas, it seems kind of appropriate thing to think about food. Now, there's been talk um, lately about veganism, eating no animal products whatsoever. Um, Now, of course, like everybody else, almost at least, we were brought up to eat a mixture of foods, whatever was available and in England at the time, which a lot of it, of course, was English grown, but some was imported, and it included meat, fish. Fish, of course, was more plentiful in the 1950s when uh, well, the UK at least was um, had its own waters and was able to fish in international waters nearer towards Iceland and catch cod and so on. So fish was available, meat was available, um, and various vegetables and grains were available, and that's what we ate. It might have included a bit of imported Argentine um, meat and certainly significant amounts of, say, New Zealand lamb and various products from Australia and New Zealand butter, Irish butter, that kind of thing. Um, it was a mixed diet and somewhat similar to what our ancient ancestors had ate. It's changed gradually, a new thing here, a new thing there, introduced, particularly things that were discovered in the empire. But they were limited in their use. Curry was, well, unknown in our household, certainly. Um, we did use some herbs, but not very much in the way of spices outside pepper. Um, Nowadays, things are very much changed for many people, but our heathen ancestry tells us that you need to be careful about introducing changes. You were made to eat the way your ancestors ate. Now, what do we mean by that exactly? Well, they do studies about diets, and the Mediterranean diet is great, or the Japanese diet is great because Japanese people live to, well, there are genetic differences between different races of people. Um, they make a slight difference, but far more important here is that they carry different enzymes, different bacteria within their bodies that are a very significant part of the digestion process. Introducing new foods needs to be done carefully and gradually. It depends how different they are as to how much difference it makes, but it's perfectly possible that a diet that's really good for, say, Japanese in Japan wouldn't be good for us for all sorts of reasons. You can see there's many studies that say, oh, people from this country, let's say Mediterranean countries, were a normal weight for years, and then they went when they moved to America or somewhere and started eating different diets. They then became fatter, and they compared the one diet to the other. But you have to remember that if they move to a different place and eat different diets, it's not suitable for them. Moving to a different place and eating different diets isn't suitable for most people. It's quite hard to cope with. It's a thing that's forgotten when you see these things saying, "Well, people all over the world, we're all people." We are. We're all different, and we were brought up in different ways. But the damning thing is that what we had when we were young, what their parents ate before, is actually very likely to be the best diet for you. You can make alterations, a bit more of this, a bit less of that, but completely new foods, particularly manufactured foods, and containing things that have been chemically made or adjusted in some factory or nutrients removed. or even milk blown through a very fine filter that's making microscopic particles of fat rather than big lumps of fat. All these things make a difference, and almost none of them are good. So what's this to do with a vegan diet? Well, it's simply that's not how we were brought up. Therefore, the first observation would be this can't be healthier for us than our traditional diet. Now, studies that say, oh well, people in blah Eastern country have lived on a vegetarian or almost a vegan diet. They're healthy and they live long. Well, they might. It doesn't mean that you will if you eat their diet. It absolutely has nothing to do with it at all. If you take another example and look at the traditional Eskimo diet, which contains almost no plant food at all, they're healthy too. But if you haven't got Inuit ancestry, the chances are that it's not good for you to eat whale blubber and seal in great quantities. Now, we do have actually some history of eating whale products because England was quite a whaling country at one time. So it may be that we can eat whale, but in fact, if your particular family hasn't been introduced to it in the past, I wouldn't particularly recommend it. All I can say is the stories I were told is it actually doesn't taste very nice. When it was sort of semi-forced upon people to some extent during the war, it was not a chosen thing. We weren't used to it. It wasn't good for us. It's really that simple. Now, there's all sorts of arguments about a vegan diet. You might be lacking in B12, but you can take a supplement, so on. And so people suddenly feeling healthier. Well, usually, if you change diet to something like that, you do other things as well, because you're doing it because you want to be healthier. So you get more exercise. You eat proper grown food, not manufactured food. You probably end up cutting out crisps, for example. Not that they're particularly bad for you, but they wouldn't be one of the best things. You cut out going to restaurants and eating things with God knows what chemicals in their sauces, because you're going onto a health diet. That's where the big change is. It's not the lack of wholesome meat. The only thing I would say is that there is some degree of evidence that processed meats can lead to higher rates of cancer than if you don't eat them. I've no evidence one way or the other, but eating a reduced amount of them could be beneficial, because this doesn't involve introducing anything new. I can see logically that actual roast beef is probably better for you than corned beef. But we are reasonably well adjusted to eating corned beef. Maybe corned beef isn't good for you, but maybe we've developed a way of coping with it. You need to bear this in mind, that if you've been brought up with it and it hasn't caused problems within your family, then it's got a very good chance of being safe for you to eat in moderate quantities. So just want to end on a last note that studies have shown that vegetarian and certainly vegan diets even more so lead to lower levels of testosterone as a sort of chemical fact. It's also well known that cults, where one man wants to control a whole group of people, they're nearly always go on vegan or vegetarian diets because it makes the people easier to control. And I think that is the damning thing about vegan diets. People on vegan diets are controllable. They do what they're told. Why is it true? I don't know. The evidence presented would seem to suggest that it is. I have no individual thing to say about this as far as I haven't personally observed it, so I don't know whether it's true or not. But just think whether if you're taking the line that's given to you by whoever it is that you listen to, do you follow this? do you question it? Are you prepared to stand up for what you believe in? If you find that you're not, well, maybe then this is why. So on that point, I'll end there.